So if we keep in mind that about 70 to 80% of what we communicate is nonverbal, then we probably also understand that the 70, 80% of the lies that we're communicating show up nonverbally as well. So we've already talked about this in class. I want to go through and just kind of recap a few things here in terms of these four categories: kinesics, paralinguistics, proxemics, and oculesics. And then, like I said, I will expand more on the physical and psychological manifestations, and we'll also talk about affect displays. We talked about those in class too, if I recall. There, this is a former student of mine several years ago. His name is Brandon. A perfectly affable, charming guy. In fact, we became friends. Had him out to the house for dinner, for conversation. He met my family, including my three daughters. Just was very impressed with this individual. And as you can see here, in terms of his proxemics, his artifacts, the way he trims his beard and his mustache, he's a biker. The leather do-rag and stuff. What's interesting is you look at his face, you see a little asymmetry in the eyes. But very engaging, very endearing kind of individual. So you can imagine my surprise when he was charged with a double homicide. My point being is we just don't know. When it comes to going through and analyzing all these areas in terms of veracity, in terms of integrity and character, there are lots of things that stand in our way of going through and figuring that out. Well, we talked about kinesics in terms of body movement. We got into emblems and illustrators and regulators and adapters. Remember that emblems are socially derived, okay? And they have some kind of a meaning attached to them based on that culturally, I'm sorry, I said socially derived, based on that cultural derivation, where that comes from. We assign all kinds of meanings, and typically emblems are manifest more on a conscious level. Illustrators get a little more subconscious. As we're talking, we might illustrate with our hands and not really know that we might be illustrating that way, or very cognizant of that at least. We do it maybe more out of habit than anything else. And here is where deception can start to get a hold in terms of what we're expressing nonverbally as far as illustrators go. Maybe you really aren't that big. Maybe it was a little smaller. Maybe it was a little bigger, whatever the case. We get into regulators in. Regulators regulate the communication channels that we're in. This goes a little deeper into the subconscious, where we're less aware of how we're regulating, more intent on controlling the conversation in terms of what's going on. And then the deepest part, in terms of our subconscious, are the adapters. And we'll spend some time with those through this clip. Adapters can be just nonsensical kinds of movement that can't be categorized in the other three categories. But what we're finding out is as physiology responds to the escalation of being questioned or having your integrity questioned or actually having to fabricate what you think might be the truth, the body's going to respond that way. And it responds on a number of different levels with a number of different types of ways that we maybe keep ourselves from speaking there. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on. The next category we got into was paralinguistics. Remember, it's not what you say, but how you say it. We talked about rate and speed and tone and pitch. All these things must be established within some kind of a baseline with your target. And then once we have some type of departure from that baseline, like they're starting to speak in machine gun types of burst, or they're speaking very quickly to maybe cover or to catch up to what it is that they're creating in terms of the deception is concerned, what the tonality is doing, the voice going up and down, is it going gravelly? Is it going deep? Is it going high? Are there indications of some type of physiological escalation going on with the subject? And typically, if the subject's trying to deceive, and if that deception is elaborate, we have lots of paralinguistic tells that go through and indicate that they're lying. But the eyes are the windows to the soul, right? Oculesics, our behavior. We talked about eye movement. We got into eyelids and pupil dilation. With eyelids, we got into this idea of blink rates. Pupil dilation, we understand that our pupils dilate under different circumstances. One of which, mostly for women, for females, is when they try to deceive, when they lie, their pupils dilate, because of there's a consciousness connection there. If they're detached, if they don't feel bad about lying, we're not going to see that kind of manifestation happen with that. Next, we got into this concept of proxemics, and we can lie in a way, artifactually especially. If you're married and you're not wearing a wedding band, for example, that could be obviously obvious deception. Or you could be wearing a wedding band and not be married and be deceiving, 180 degrees out of phase of the initial lie. There, you could be wearing a yarmulke or a crucifix or a CTR ring or something that might denote perhaps your religious affiliation, all to no avail, or all to go through and maybe put yourself a version of yourself out there that might not truly be you. Territorial is what we do with the space that's around us, how we mark that territory, how we decorate it, what we do with our automobiles become customized and to go through and as our own territory to go through and express. They're also highly artifactual as well. Space, the relationships that we have, we talked about that in class. We can manipulate space to go through and portray or present something that really isn't the truth as well. We typically determine relationships with people by how they share their space, or in each other's intimate space or personal space. If they're outside of that and involved in a social space, it's a little bit more difficult to go through perhaps and define what that relationship might be. So then we get into physical indicators. I don't think we got this far in class, so I'm going to spend a little bit more time here in these areas. And as I alluded to, adapters are one of our biggest physical indicators that are out there, because aside from just kind of taking care of some type of physiological need, like your face itches or you might be yawning, adapters can be indicative of an escalation in anxiety or angst, and that escalation might be due to the subject trying to fabricate a lie, or that they're afraid that they're going to be caught in that lie, or likewise, they're afraid that the truth that they speak might have some critical ramifications as well, right? So we have to look at both sides of these manifestations in terms of how they go. We have a couple of systems going on. We have an endocrine system. We have a limbic system. The limbic system results from creation and dumping of cortisol, and which makes us respond to fear. The limbic system responds to the endocrine system responds more to the concepts of anger and what's going on there. Well, anytime you mess around with these hormones that are governed by these systems, the body's going to go through and respond. And with some of those, like in the limbic system, or when adrenaline's dumped into the endocrine system, I might have these mixed up, it's been a while. Anyway, the adrenaline itself, that fight or flight concept, and its cortisol kicks in on top of that, it makes your face itch. And if you're dealing with a subject who feels like they're being caught in a lie and they're afraid of being discovered within their deception, and they start itching their face, a lot of that itching happens on a subconscious level. I've rarely had a subject go through, and when we question them, when we debrief them after the interrogation and said, did you know that you were scratching your face during this time of questioning? Nobody realizes that that's what's going on. So it's an adapter, just an innocent scratch of the face, but when that scratching happens underneath the jawline, around the back of the neck, underneath the ear, up into the cheekbone, even into the forehead, as those neurons start to respond to that dump of cortisol and adrenaline, you can bet that's a pretty solid tell that they are escalated. Not that they're lying necessarily, but if the escalation is a result of trying to cover up a lie, trying to create a lie, or trying to maybe convince somebody of the truth, it's worth taking a look at. We also have a couple of other manifestations here of the way we breathe, how many breaths per minute that we're getting, and our pulmonary system as well. And these manifest on two different levels. If an individual starts to breathe more shallow and more rapidly, then they have the inability really to blow off the bad air. And as a response to that, we'll get into um, more instances of yawning or sighing, big heavy sighs or long yawns as they try to blow off that bad air, because the way they're breathing, because they're escalated in trying to go through and maybe create the deception, um, they breathe more shallow. They get into what's called pursed lipped breathing. If you've ever worked out really, really hard, very intensely over a short period of time, your body's struggling to go through and blow off the bad air and get more oxygen in to make that oxygenation happen, so your muscles get that oxidation that they need. We have a tendency to blow, to push against our pursed lips. And what that does is it creates a back pressure in the lungs that allows that bad air to come out a little bit more easily. And consequently, that becomes a tell as well. So yawning, heavy sighing, pursed lip breathing. Pulmonary, our heart rates can escalate. We can see that manifest in the carotid artery in the neck. We can see that happen within the temples. If our subject that we're talking to happens to be seated across from us and their legs are crossed, we can see their toes dip within the pulse rate of their heart, because the femoral artery certainly is going to go through and manifest what that pulse rate is going to be. And all of these require somebody watching them, and usually it's somebody apart from the actual interrogator. Okay, somebody who's not asking the questions. They're just going through and watching what's going on. And getting a baseline, and then seeing how subjects might go through and depart from that baseline. Like in blink rates with the oculesics. So we'll establish a baseline in terms of how often they're blinking, and then if they depart from that, they blink more or they blink less, then we have something to go through maybe and consider. Lastly is this concept of psychological manifestations. And here's where this kind of gets a little on the creepy side if you understand the impact of each of these. I won't go through all these. I'll deal with detachment, delight, and direction here. Diminishing as well. Diminishing is psychologically where our subject actually becomes, they try to make themselves smaller. If they're smaller, then they're less noticeable. And I realize that this could just be a matter of a half an inch or an inch in terms of the girth of their body. If they roll their shoulders forward and they hunch down and they lose their posture, maybe 2 or 3 inches in height, kind of a thing. But the brain's saying, I don't want to be here. I don't want you to see me, so I'm going to make myself smaller. What's consciously, we're not making that connection. It's the brain working in a defense mechanism to pull a body down. Okay, to go through and make your target smaller in that respect. Detachment is something that happens between the eyes and the mouth. The mouth might be smiling, but the eyes are dead. There's no crow's feet manifest and a genuine smile there. Delight deals with what we call duper's delight. I'll show you some examples of that in class as we get together next week. Where if we feel we've gotten away with something, and as much as we might want to mask maybe the trauma of what we've gone through, when it comes to light, perhaps that we've gotten away with it in terms of a high concept deception. There's a little bit of sociopathic joy that's felt within getting away with something, and as a result, we see just a small wry smile come across the lips, much like you see in this person here. And I'm not saying this is duper's delight, but this is kind of what it looks like. And we'll look at some examples of that in class. Disconnection is a total disconnection of conscience. And so we might have a display of inappropriate emotions. A student will come in and tell me the reason why they missed class last time is because their grandfather died, and then they laugh or giggle after that. That becomes a disconnection cue in terms of psychological manifestations. The last thing there is direction, and this has to do more with the feet than anything else in terms of kinetic movement. But in gambling, for example, if we're suspicious of somebody pinching a chip or a card from a blackjack table. Pinching a chip is where they'll go through and they'll place their bet, and then they'll palm a chip off the bet, okay, and it'll go away, or they'll add a chip onto the bet while the betting process is going on, or while the roulette wheel is going. If they feel that they have a better chance of winning, they'll stack a chip in there. Okay, so once they do that, they feel that they've gotten away from, with that. If they don't want to be caught now that they've gone through and done the infraction, now they don't want to get caught. Well, the feet, we looked at a study of this. We placed cameras underneath gaming tables to watch what the feet do. On the subject who's cheating, the toes will turn towards the egress of the casino. Okay, the job's done. Now I'm going to get out of here. The body's like, okay, let's go, let's go, let's go. The brain's like, well, I have to collect this bet. I have to wait, and I need to walk away, more calmly. I can't go through and manifest that I'm nervous about this. But the feet don't lie, and they find the exit, and then the body goes through and follows after that. It's fascinating to go through and watch this kind of direction indexing that happens with the feet. Let's see, I think we got into affect displays. We talked a little bit about the guy who came up with microexpressions. Paul Ekman is his name, Dr. Ekman, who over the course of 20 years did a study on human expression. And he discovered that humans not only express these kinds of emotions, but they also, on a regular basis, okay, for a long term, they also express these emotions in terms of microexpressions. So we might be involved in just a neutral expression, which isn't up here, but we're not really expressing anything, okay? And somebody might be talking to us, and if we don't like what they say, or we think it's funny, or it surprises us, or whatever the case might be, but we don't want to show our emotional response to that. And you've all done this, especially in the dating community. As much as we might try to not express ourselves, a microexpression will punch through that patina of our faking it. Okay, it'll punch through that mask, and it'll come up and show surprise or fear or happiness. Any of those. This is what they look like. Okay. Anger, fear, surprise, happiness, sadness, disgust, and the last one, contempt. And contempt is the one that we need to be probably the most concerned about. Okay, here's Taylor. He was an intern of mine. He's now in covert operations. This is his resting face. Okay, his neutral, and this is what his contempt looks like. So you see the eyes go vacant in terms of expression, partially closed that way. They lose any kind of expression. And the mouth manifests what's called an asymmetrical lip curl. It goes up to one side. And this doesn't happen long. In fact, contempt is probably one of the most popular micro-expressions out there that happens in less than a 30th of a second. Okay? When you're dealing with a subject, in terms of their escalation, in terms of trying to go through and to determine whether they're deceiving you, if you see the contempt manifestation, this is a look that tells you, I don't care about you, and I don't care if I'm lying to you. I don't care if I'm about to draw a weapon and put you away. This is a considerable tell to take very seriously in what we're getting involved with. So those are the nonverbal cues there. When we get back together again, we talked about baselines a little bit. We'll talk more about baselines. We'll get into some applications, and we'll make some correlations with this idea of context and our own perceptual influences that we bring into the idea of deception detection. Okay? All right. We'll see you guys next Tuesday.